Hello, friend. This is Ryan Hicks of TalkToProfit.com, and today I want to answer a question somebody had about my schedule. And this is an interesting question because they said that I heard you on an interview and you were talking about how your schedule was down to 5-minute intervals. That made me feel overwhelmed. How do you not feel overwhelmed and burned out? And here's the thing. This is going to be rough. I know people aren't going to hear this, but please hear this whole thing because this is very important to you, because there are weaknesses being pushed on people. There are inefficiencies being pushed on people. And what life is to be lived for is being warped in most people's minds, which leads to getting overwhelmed, which leads to feeling quote unquote burned out. Being overwhelmed and being burned out, there's a couple things that go with it, but one, it's weakness. And I'm not weak, and you're not weak. Most people are being told they're weak, and so it leads to them feeling this way, but it's a choice you're making. And yes, my schedule is very detailed, down to 5-minute intervals in some cases, but I don't feel overwhelmed. First thing, because I make the schedule. Now, if you have somebody else making your schedule for you, an assistant or something, and of course, if you're a high-performing person, you're going to have assistants and people interjecting things into your schedule, and that's fine. But you have to be the one that makes the final decision on your schedule. If it's overwhelming you, something's wrong in your scheduling, and you need to fix that. Maybe the person helping you, if you have somebody doing it all for you, that's a serious problem if you're not overlooking this stuff and you don't have the final word on what your schedule is. You're just running around to and fro. You don't have enough time between airports or whatever because the person making the schedule has no clue what goes on at that airport, how long it takes you to get out of the plane and all this stuff. You need to be the one that lay down the rules on, okay, between this and this point, I need 30 minutes at least. But beyond that, a lot of the excuses people have were saying they're overwhelmed or they feel burned out. I've heard people tell me that they feel overwhelmed. And yet they were honest enough to admit that they still watched a movie that night. How are you overwhelmed, but you still have enough time to waste 2 or 3 hours on entertainment? They're still playing video games. They're still scrolling social media for hours. That's not overwhelmed. And this is a fundamental thing. You're never going to hear anybody else talking about this. At least I've never heard anyone talk about this. Where most people are talking about being overwhelmed or feeling burned out, what that really means is that they don't have enough time for all the time-wasting activities they want to do. They don't feel like they have enough time to be entertained because they believe, they'll never say this, but in their hearts, they believe life is to be lived to experience entertainment and relaxation. And that's not what life is to be lived for. So they get overwhelmed real easily because they've taught themselves that what they're doing is not life. The real life is this watching movies, is playing video games, is watching TV series, is scrolling social media. That's the real life. And if they don't get enough of that, they start to feel overwhelmed. They start to feel burned out. These are all choices you make. Now, there are real people in countries that actually get burned out. They work themselves to death. Japan's notorious for that, where people are just working so much. That's not most people's problem. They're not working so much. They just have adapted to a weak mentality that keeps them paralyzed in this mediocrity. So one thing, if you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling burned out, you are the one that has control of your schedule. If your schedule's a disaster and you're not giving yourself enough time between meetings or whatever you're doing, that's on you. You have to be the final arbiter of that experience, your schedule, what it is, what you're going to choose to allow into it, and what you're not going to. For one thing, in a professional environment, there are so many useless meetings. If you're the leader or have any kind of say over the matter, you need to cut out a lot of those meetings or cut them down in time. If they're going an hour, maybe they need to be 10 minutes. There are some people who justify their job by just scheduling a bunch of meetings to look like they're productive, look like they're doing something. You need to call that out. You don't need a bunch of wasted time in meetings that aren't accomplishing anything. If there's not something major being accomplished in that meeting, what is the point of it? Most of these things could be handled with an email. They don't need to have a whole blown out meeting and time wasted in that endeavor. But I want to stress this. You control your schedule. Yes, my schedule may look insane to some people. It may look overwhelming to some. But I enjoy it. And here's the thing. I have enough time for everything I need to do. There's no problems there. There's no stress. I'm not overwhelmed. I'm not feeling burned out or anything like that. Everything's fine. And my schedule, I know, is far more than the average person. You have to get rid of this mentality that life exists to be entertained. You just got to rush home so you can be entertained. Now you can start living life. Your business is part of your life. All of it works together. Yes, you need relaxation. The average person has too much relaxation. And their burned out feeling is just them feeling deprived of the 8 hours of entertainment they wanted that day. Or because they feel like they spent too much time in their work and not enough time playing. But you can set up your work in such a way that it is play, that it feels like a game. It's not stressing you. It's not burdening you. You're not feeling overwhelmed. But you have to stand up and become the person who rises above the mediocrity of the world telling you need work-life balance or whatever nonsense the world's promoting now, which all of it leads to mediocrity. None of it leads to great success. And you have some people who know nothing who point to this billionaire over here. Look, they only work a few hours a day. See, I could do that too and be a billionaire. No, you're seeing the end result of that person being a billionaire and not having to work anymore. And they're kind of half-hearted efforts now because they have a bunch of systems in place and thousands of employees doing the work for them. They don't need to work that much. Now they could and they probably should in going into other endeavors, but that's the last person you want to look to for advice on how to live your life, because the way they're living their life now, if you mimic that, you're going to be a disastrous failure because you don't have the billions of dollars behind you. You don't have the thousands of employees backing you and all their hundreds of thousands of hours of work going into your businesses. You just have yourself or maybe just a couple other employees. So stop looking to billionaires and multimillionaires who don't do anything anymore because they have enough money and they have enough people in place that they don't have to. Are these people who are very rich, but the spark of creativity has left them? The entrepreneurial spirit has gone and they're just floundering around. There are plenty of people who are very successful who do a lot. They still work a lot. They want to work. They like creating and doing things and being active. They don't want to sit around on a beach doing nothing all day. Your life needs to be lived to be like your Creator, to be like God, to be creating, to be doing things, to be working. Remember, when Jesus was on earth ministering, and the scribes and Pharisees and all these religious types are coming around and arguing with him, and, oh, is it lawful to do good in the Sabbath? And just all this nonsense because they completely missed the point. The Sabbath was not made for God. It was made for man. And you got to understand, those people back then worked 6 full days and they had 1 day a week of relaxation, a break. They weren't like modern people who every day have relaxation and breaks by large quantities of it, and entertainment, just all this time wasting. And even when Jesus was doing good in the Sabbath, he said, my Father works. Even on the Sabbath, God was working still. This is a very important principle. God is the one who we are to be imitating. We're to be imitators of our Father in heaven. Jesus showed us the principle. He showed us the Father. This pulling back, this shrinking back, this laziness, that's not being like the Father. I'm not telling you to never relax. I'm not telling you to just work 20 hours a day or anything like that. There may be times where you have to do that, though. You have to root out of your mind this mentality that my life exists just to be entertained, just to relax, just to lounge around, just to whatever. And see the true point of life, which is to be like God, to be creating, to be active, to be endeavoring in new adventures, basically. Taking on new projects, doing great things and adding great value to the world because you are like your Father which is in heaven. My friend, I pray this is a blessing for you. May God bless you richly.